Very good. Thank you very much indeed for, well, it's been a fascinating morning, quite apart from anything else. My granny was a Glaswegian, and she always said the best thing that ever came out of Edinburgh was the 5:19 train. And I hope it's all right in Glasgow to make a comment about the physical layout of Edinburgh that tells us a huge amount about the relationship between faith and finance. If you look at the new town, which was designed essentially to show the union between Scotland and England and Wales, the heart of it is that huge area bordered at one end by St. George's Square, at the other end by St. Andrew's Square. And if you look at the original plan, there was going to be a huge church of St. George, that's there, and there was going to be a huge church of St. Andrew at the other end, which isn't there. It's the Bank of Scotland. St. Andrew's Church is kind of squeezed into the sort of road coming off it. And I think that captures a little of the tension that we have had culturally between finance and between faith. And I love the story that Lord Wallace told of Reverend Henry Duncan. But as he pointed out, he struggled. He struggled. And I think in terms of the world of faith and finance, we are at the beginning where we're beginning to sketch out where the arguments will be, where the struggles will be, although there are some very exciting things that are happening. But I've been asked to talk about what is going on. And I want to point to a quote from Confucius. I'm a China scholar. I translate classical Chinese because, well, somebody has to. And there's a quote in which he says, first of all, practice what you want to preach, and then preach about what you're already doing. And Umar picked up on this and said, it's about what we do. It's about what we're actually going to make different that matters. And FaithInvest had quite a role in helping to develop the multi-faith statement issued by the Pope and some 40-plus religious leaders on October the 4th in Rome. And I've been involved with COPs since Kyoto, back in the 90s. And there have been hundreds of faith statements, multi-faith statements, issued to the good, the great, and the not-so-good and the not-so-great who attend these events. And nobody has paid the slightest bit of attention. Absolutely no attention at all. Because from the faith perspective, we've said, now, this is what we'd like you to do, and you really should notice there's a crisis, and please pay attention to what, please do what we ask, and by the way, you shouldn't be doing that. And the first half of that statement issued on October the 4th is in that vein. But the second half marks a fundamental shift. And that fundamental shift is that the second half says, and this is what we are going to do as faiths. And the major paragraph in that second half is we are going to look at our assets, and we're going to move those assets. We're going to use those assets, not just investments. The faiths own 8% of the habitable surface of the planet. 5% of commercial forestry is owned by faiths. Another 15% of the surface of the planet is considered sacred. We may not own it, like the Taoists in China no longer own their sacred mountains, but because they're sacred, the biodiversity there is far higher than on any other mountain level. So we have assets, we have buildings. We've already heard about putting solar panels into churches. And I love the issue that you raised, Lord Wallace. What do you do with a medieval Gothic church? You can't really put a full ceiling in order to contain the heating. But maybe there are other ways that we can do this. My church that I go to, a little country one, we had a heating system put in the 1880s. We sold all the metal in the 1950s to pay enough money to repair the roof. So, we have to make choices as to what we're going to do with the limited resources we have and with the history that we've been given. So this second half of the multi-faith statement is a shift. And it's a shift because of the work of many people in this room, a shift that has come about by saying, let us remember that actually we are stakeholders. We run 50% of all schools, 64% of all schools in sub-Saharan Africa, according to UNICEF. We run a third of all universities, and we've just heard from Eric about the wonderful new one in India. We run more than a third of all medical facilities. And yet we have behaved as faiths as though our only role was to preach and to point a finger and tell people what we were against. We have failed. And Lord Alderdice made this point. If 80 to 85% of the world's population are believers, I mean, being an Anglican, the word believer is a little bit of an iffy phrase, frankly, because we're not entirely sure what we believe in, and we certainly hope nobody will ever ask us. But if we so please don't. It would just be so embarrassing at this point in the morning. So if we have, let's say that we've got 40% of that 85% is actually doing something because of what they believe, well, my God, we've been an abysmal failure. And yet we have these assets. We've behaved as though somebody else was in charge of money. Somebody else was in charge of education. Somebody else was in charge of inspiring. Somebody else was in charge of media. No, it's us. That's the shocking thing. It's us. And I think the other issue here too is, and this has been touched on, is that climate change is not the greatest crisis facing us. That wonderful phrase from Gus Speth that was quoted by Lord Wallace. Climate change is a symptom of the malaise, as is biodiversity loss, as is social injustice. And to focus only on one and to think that if you can solve that bit, you've solved the rest, is to miss the point. And that's, again, where faiths go deeper. We know that the problem is us, and that we need to be making those changes. I think also, and Eric raised this, different models. Not all faiths do believe in stewardship. In fact, not all forms of Christianity believe in stewardship. In the Orthodox Church, the model of our relationship is that we are the priests of creation. We are here simply, yet gloriously, to be the channel of grace to all of creation and to give the praise of all creation back to the Creator. We are called, in other words, to be a blessing, which is a very different notion. And I want to tackle that one briefly with regards to the SDGs. We were asked, in my previous organization I set up with Prince Philip, called the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, we were asked by the UN to coordinate the major meeting between the faiths and all the sections of the UN on the SDGs. And I think, as so often happens when a secular group discovers religion, is they really just wanted us to be jolly useful, cheap labor and a nice, convenient way of getting a moral message out without any sense that it might be something to do with them. God forbid that it would actually mean they had to make a change. And so we had this meeting, and I genuinely think they just thought the faiths were going to rubber stamp the SDGs and say, oh, thank you. But you know, it's amazing, we never thought about education before, or health, because we've only been doing that for the last couple of thousand years. Yeah, that's really revelatory that we might make a difference with that. That's fantastic. We certainly are challenged by issues around gender. Let's be frank, that's a huge glaring area for us. But it was best summed up, the tension between the faith perspective and the UN's perspective, by one of our Muslim colleagues, a wonderful woman called Hajat, who said the problem with the SDGs is it's like going to IKEA and buying a table in order that you get the manual on how to put it together. Rather than that you go to IKEA to buy a table around which for the rest of your lives and your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives, they will sit and they will share food and they will cry and they will celebrate and they will argue and they will resolve things. In other words, it's relationships, not management. And we have allowed ourselves to be seduced into the idea that the faith relationship with the rest of creation, of which we are a part, not apart from, is management. It's not. It's relationships. I remember a wonderful nun in Zambia saying, Martin, there are 4 relationships. There's your relationship with the divine, however you understand that. There's your relationship with your neighbor. There is your relationship with the rest of creation. And there is your relationship with yourself. That's what faiths bring, is relationships into all this. And that's why in the work that FaithInvest does, we're basically saying to each faith, as we're also doing with the Faith Plans program, which we're doing with WWF, and which very much tied up with Lorna and the program on the Laudato Si Action platform. We're saying, go back, recover what it is that you actually believe. What are the core tenets of what you believe? What is the relationship that lies at the heart of your faith? From that, what are the values that come from that? Then in what way are you implementing those values within the structures of your faith about how you manage your role as stakeholders? And then then the next stage is, what is it that therefore you don't do? And having worked out that, then work out what it is you want to do. As faiths, we're very good at telling people what we're against. We're not so good at telling people what we're for. And we're not very good at then saying, therefore, if you wish to be faithful, this is how you should be living. And the Faith Plans program, which we're delighted so many of you here are involved with, is basically saying to each faith, dig deep, go back to your roots in order to discover why you exist. And then look and see whether those roots still feed you in any way. And I want to finish, before I say a thank you, as Omar has asked me to do that on behalf of all of us, the whole issue of risk. We have a wonderful Singaporean colleague called Melvin. And Melvin's point is this. He has faith. He's a very devout Christian who works with many different faiths. And when someone said, and what does faith mean to you? He said, I spell faith, R-I-S-K, risk. And I think one of the things, and Eric has touched on this already, one of the things that working with other faiths does is that we must drop the idea that if only everybody could agree, we'd have a happier world. We've tried that. It doesn't work. I've been working as a theologian with the environmental movement for many years, and one thing I've learned is that God, through evolution, loves diversity. Without diversity, we wouldn't have overcome the problems we've had over the last 500 million years. Well, if God loves diversity in creation, do you know, I honestly think that she might actually quite like diversity in how we function and think, that it isn't all about one answer. The future is pluralistic. The future is diversity. The future, therefore, is immensely risky, but probably less risky than one group thinking that if only everybody agreed with them, the world would be a better place, and burning the ones who don't agree with them. So our work in FaithInvest is to say, come proud of your own traditions, but humble enough to listen. And that, I think, is the secret of how we as faiths can work together with our assets, taking seriously our stakeholder role.